What if the life you're living isn't the life you were meant to live? What if the person you've become isn't who you really are? If you knew there was more for your life, what would you have to change? And if nothing changed, what would it cost you 5 years from now? And would you recognize yourself? Over the last 3 episodes, I've challenged the stories you've been living, explored why so many people stay stuck, and looked honestly at the price we pay when we choose comfort over growth. But today, I believe we arrive at a place where everything begins to shift. So I want to take you back to where the journey started. Because real transformation, it doesn't start with motivation. It doesn't start with willpower. It starts with awareness. And before we start to really tackle awareness, I don't want you to forget where we're building from. So if you haven't had the opportunity to go back and listen to the first 3 episodes, I want you to listen to them because I'm going to briefly recap them because I believe it's important because we're building. And again, I thank you for tuning in today. My name is Ingra Michelle Williams, and I am your 180 Life Coach, the founder of the Beginning Movement. And I explained that I'm not a philosopher. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a healthcare professional. I describe myself as a humanologist, a woman who has lived life, who has had experiences, who has questioned her own life, her own existence, and her what ifs. And we talked about in episode 1, what if? What if who you think you are is not who you were intended to be, but instead a person that was created out of situations, traumas, experiences, pain, disappointments, letdowns, different scenarios, situations that we have survived. And you operate, and you may not even consciously realize that you're operating in a new pattern, not the pattern in which you were. And I talked about the tree and how the tree was damaged and it wasn't obvious when the tree got ran over. But as the tree continued to grow, then it was visible that you could see some trauma, something happened. And now that the tree was growing, it was too late. You could not try to correct it because it was too strong, right? But the thing that's so wonderful about me and you is the fact that we're we're pliable, we're flexible. We can opt to change. We can opt to correct ourselves and make the necessary course corrections if we desire to get back to where we were always meant to be. Now, when I say that, I'm not trying to create something new. I'm not trying to make you feel like something is wrong with who you are. No, but I'm talking about at the core, before the pain, before the trauma, before the disappointments. Who were you? Because, see, I love looking at children. Children are the most innocent ways of looking at a human being because they don't know fear. No one's taught them that they could not be. They just are. Their imaginations, I'm going to have a house that's billions and billions of miles tall. And then the other kid goes, no, my house is going to be billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of miles wide. And they believe it until the world says, that's impossible. You can't have a house that's billions and billions of miles tall. That doesn't exist. And then suddenly they put a cap on their dreaming. They start to say, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't dream that because it may be impossible. And this is where we start to drift from who we were meant to be. We were meant to be, elevate our lives. We were meant to dream. We were meant to excel in every way humanly possible, whatever we believe for ourselves. One of my favorite Bible verses is all things are possible to those who believe. All things, not some things, most things, many things, but all things are possible to those who believe. And somewhere in life, we stop believing, not because we intended to, it's because of all those micro tears to our souls that started limiting and started changing and started giving us a new ideology that we were never born with. Who told you you couldn't jump? Who told you you couldn't dream? Who told you you couldn't be? And until we start to ask ourselves the important questions, sometimes we'll never even realize why we're operating the way that we're operating because we may not even consciously remember. And I gave you the story and I want to recap it because I want you to get this point of what if. So you start to question your life. Because again, when we move on to awareness, that's where the point of transformation really starts, is when you become aware. And sometimes we're aware, but we keep pressing down, right? Because we think about the cost, we think about why some people never change. And the reason why some people never change because then they think, oh, it got to be something wrong with me. If I'm realizing I'm doing this and I wasn't intentionally meant to do it, I better not say anything because I don't want people to think there's something wrong with me. And the fact that we're even thinking about what other people think, that's a whole nother subject. And it's a whole nother issue and it's a whole nother pattern. And I want you to start to recognize the patterns in your life, why you do the same things over and over again. But I want to go back to the story that I told you about the young lady who came in to buy a car from me, and she had the aunt with her and she wanted to look at Hondas, and the aunt was like, "Ugh, we don't want to look at Hondas. You know, in my family, we only drive Mercedes Benzes." And she said it with this pride. It you'd have to have been there. But she said it with a sense of pride, and there's nothing wrong with a sense of pride. But immediately in that conversation, I kept thinking, but why? Now, I drive people crazy who know me in my life because I'm always asking why. I'm always asking the questions because that's what a humanologist does. We study human behavior. So I'm sitting here thinking, why is it that she wants this young lady to get a Mercedes Benz? Because I know the upkeep on a Mercedes is expensive. I know the repair costs on a Mercedes is expensive. Now, I'm like anybody else. I've been in Mercedes. I've been in brand new Mercedes, and I'm like, oh my God, this is really nice. This is nice. This is nice. But I started to get a GLB before I bought my Acura. I thought that GLB was so cute. So, so cute. It was tricked out. It had the full digital display. Husband was in the car. We ride and we ride and we ride. And he's like, this is what you want. I'm like, ain't it nice? It had the panoramic sunroof, but all I kept hearing in the back of my head is, girl, you better get out this car because when something break on it, you going to be mad at yourself, right? You better go on and get that Acura MDX and be proud. Now, I'll be honest with you. I don't regret my decision, right? Because for me, reliability, historical reliability, as well as depreciation was one of the things that was at the forefront of my mind, right? I was like, maybe I'll get the Lexus, maybe I'll get the Acura. I was leaning more Lexus. My husband was like, Acura, Lexus, Acura, right? But me being in that GLB, it was cute. But my sense and sensibility was like, no, that was where my decision making was coming from. But here I am at this conversation that I'm seeing taking place in front of me between the elder and this young woman who was obviously under distress about her car making decision because we respect our elders. We respect their advice. And so here she was, which should have been an exciting time for her. All I kept sensing was the stress and the pressure of the situation. And needless to say, after looking at the Mercedes and looking at the Hondas, she left with nothing. Now, I think about her and I use her in this example of what if. Where are you going, Ingra? Well, stay with me. Because everything, it originates, every story, every life. And for this young lady to feel like all I want is a Honda. I don't know what her reasons are. Maybe she was like me, reliability, cost, ease of maintenance. But here was the aunt saying, but in our family, the only car we drive is Mercedes. My sister has a Mercedes. Her brother has a Mercedes. As you work with me, guys, you're gonna find, okay, I'm a little crazy, and I will do a lot of voice inflections. I can't help it, but I'm listening to this girl rattle off everybody in her lineage who owns a Mercedes Benz and why that's important, right? And I'm thinking, where did it start? And all I kept imagining is her great great grandfather. Okay, maybe we don't have to go back that far. Let's just say her great grandfather. And I'm imagining, and this is hypothetical, an older gentleman who worked really, really hard, and he lives in this small town. And there's this rich guy who lives up the street from him who's always driving past in his Mercedes Benz. And he gets attention, and everybody's looking at how he is so flashy in his beautiful Mercedes driving down the car. And the grandfather, the great grandfather, looks and he's admiring him every day. And one day he pulls up to the great grandfather and he's like, when you decide you want to change your life, and feel like a real man, you'll get you a Mercedes too. And so the great grandfather, remembering these words that were spoken to him, one day he came into some money. He got a better job and he went down to the Mercedes dealership and he got approved and he bought his first Mercedes Benz. And it was a proud day for him and it was a proud day for his family because when he drove up the street, now he was getting the same adoration and admiration from all of the people in the neighborhood. Look at John, great granddaddy John. He has his Mercedes Benz. And that feeling was so powerful for him because he realized that he had lived in a situation of poverty all his life. And now he had finally made it. He had finally done something that made him proud of himself. And he wanted to make sure that his family would always live in the same pride and dignity that he had. And so immediately he told his children, when you buy your first car, the only car the Johnsons will buy is a Mercedes Benz. And so now, when the little boy grows up, the first car that dad takes him out to get is his Mercedes Benz. And then his daughter grows up and she gets her Mercedes Benz. And so now, what started from one moment of feelings of lack turned into a family tradition bred out of inadequacy because they didn't feel validated until the Mercedes. And so now, here we are at this young lady's opportunity to make her rite of passage, and all she wants is a Honda. And she's immediately criticized for her choice. That's not what we do in this family. You buy a Mercedes Benz. And so seeing the hurt of the inability to express what she wants, but instead to have to conform to what someone else has laid before her, a path that she did not want to take. In that moment, she could have taken it. But instead, she paused because there was still some fight in her that this is not what I want for myself. Now, I don't know how that story ended. I don't know if she succumbed, if she finally got the Mercedes, or if she bought the Honda. But I know that day there was a seed that was born. Now, what it will produce and what its roots will be, they started growing that day because these issues, these situations, these experiences, they grow roots. And we don't know if it's going to be a flower or we don't know if it's going to be a weed. Okay. And we'll talk about that because every experience that we go that changes our life doesn't necessarily mean that it's not helpful, that they're only harmful, because there are traumas that can actually better us as people. I'm one of those people because heck, my whole life I was told that I was bad. And as a result of what grew, it grew a beautiful flower because I always opted that I am going to walk the straight and narrow. And so my life has been one of integrity. It has been one of honesty. It's been one of how do I show up and what kind of life do I reflect because I want it to be a life without question, right? But in this particular case, how do I know? Because for that young lady, she could have either decided, you know what, I'm so sick of this, and for the rest of her life, she could have turned into a rebel. Everything that she did in her life is if you say go left, I'm going to go right because I'm tired of people trying to force me to do what they want me to do. And then 20 years from now, she could find herself making decisions, not because they're the best decisions, but because somebody gave her advice that she didn't want. And so now every time she gets advice from somebody, she will not go with that advice because she feels in her heart that she's standing up for herself, that she's not allowing herself to conform. And she may not even remember where that particular part of her personality evolved from, that evolved from that one decision when she was 19, trying to make her first car purchase. Are you with me? Are you understanding where I'm going here? Because it happens to us all. It happened to me, and I didn't even realize that I was living a life that was not authentic to Ingra. If I look back, and if you ever see some of my older videos, I will say, hi, this is I Michelle. Hi, this is Ingra Michelle. Hi, this is Pear. This is Ingra Williams. This is I Michelle. I had so many reiterations of my name because for so long, my identity was questioned. My dad called me Michelle. My mom called me Ingra. I always hated Ingra. I love Michelle, but Michelle was my middle name. And so maybe I should just be I Michelle. Maybe I should be Ingra Michelle. But then Ingra is unique. You don't meet a whole lot of Ingras. And it's the trauma from the little simple things that have happened in our lives that start to make us question even who we are. At least it happened for me. And so we have to start saying, what if, and just starting to think over our lives. Why do I do what I do? Is it rooted in some ideology that was given to me at a moment of my life that I've forgotten? Because that's where awareness begins, is when you start to question and you start to look into your life. And then we visited why some people never change. And we talked about the fact that change can be scary. People like to live in certainty. Predictability is what we expect from the core of being human. But with the predictability, with the certainty, we also need amount of uncertainty because it gives us excitement. But when we're looking at ourselves, we like to think of ourselves as being consistent people in how we show up and what we do, the way we do it. And so for me, I always try to be that bubbles coming out of my head, ponytail girl. When I look back at a lot of pictures over my life, even if I just looked in the past 2 years. And I say the past 2 years because in that process, I was breaking and I was totally unaware. I had so much pressure on me. And at the same time, I had so many blessings around me. And so I felt, how can I have pressure and still be blessed? You can't talk about the pressure when you have so many blessings. And so my feelings became irrelevant and I started to just operate. And so when I look at over the past 2 years of photos and things, I see the smiles, I see the laughing, but I also realize that there's less of those moments. I would have shared more, but I was so into my own head trying to figure out what I was feeling. And I was trying to ignore what I was feeling. And we'll talk more about it when we build into awareness. But I kept doing what I was doing because it was consistency. I didn't want to leave my job, even when I knew I should have left it. I didn't leave that job until I was forced. When I closed my eyes and I thought about, can I see myself getting up another day and going to that job? And when I closed my eyes and I visualized it, as I saw myself getting out the car, walking through the parking lot, and when I looked up and visually saw the building, I had a knot that came into my stomach. That knot that you get when you're scared, when you've done something wrong, when you know you're in trouble. Everybody has experienced that. Because so much of our emotions, the core, is in our abdominals, in our digestive tract, so many nerve endings, right? And so immediately, just through visualization, not actually even walking through it, the feeling was so strong. It solidified for me to get on my computer and to type out that, thank you so much. I appreciate you, but I will not be returning. Please consider this my letter of resignation. And I have not looked back. I can say that that was the beginning of my becoming. But there's some other events that happened alongside of that. But the pain had to get to a point where there was no running, no hiding. And I told you, my goal is to save you time. If I can save you anything, let me save you some time. Because time is the one thing that you cannot get back. And that ties in with the cost of not changing. And I said, there's a cost. There's a cost. It just depends on what area of your life has been affected. And chances are there's multiple areas. When you get to a point when you look in the mirror and you pause as you look at yourself and you start to say, wow, I didn't realize I looked like that. Or, wow, I didn't realize I had that little wrinkle right there. All of those are signs of, I don't even recognize myself because you're surviving, you're going through every day trying to figure out, why do I feel like this? And I believe when we're not walking in authenticity of who we were created to be, because now, even today, before I got on here to do this, I have been creating. I am a creator. I have been designing posters and merchandise. And every time I create another beautiful space, another beautiful item, something in my heart it just lightens up. It's like truth because now you're operating in the element, bringing forth the things that you were created to do. When I'm out doing a job that doesn't fulfill me, it becomes a struggle, it becomes hard. And when we spend 9 hours of our lives at jobs every day, I think we owe it to ourselves to really say, is this job the job that I really desire for myself? And if it's not, why am I still here? And why we do what we do is so rooted in what we believe. And that's where I come from, the false ideologies, something that was taught to you. One of the things that my husband told me, he said, my dad always said to me, as long as you got a strong back, son, you can work. I thought that was hilarious. Hilarious. Why did I find it hilarious? Because for me, what I have learned in my life is I can make a lot more money using my mind than I can my body. People don't respect when we use our bodies to do labor, to make a living. They will allow us to wear ourselves down. But I found that as long as I use my mind, I'm unlimited by what I can do, right? And so here I am now being able to create and be in a place and a space that I know for a fact I could not be sharing these things with you if I was not living them. And I'm going to continue to evolve and to grow because the beauty of becoming is you don't just shift and change. It's about the multiple shifts that happened at different increments in time that allow you to start to walk in freedom and authenticity, to be the person that you were always created to be. And there is freedom in that. And the cost of staying stuck, it can come up in monetary ways because it could be a job decision, right? That holds you where you are. It could be in confidence because maybe you always wanted to go and sing, but you never take that opportunity because you're too embarrassed. I think I weigh too much. I'm too fat. I don't like my hair. We'll take the slightest of things that we don't like about ourselves and we won't move and shift and we'll stay stuck in a pattern. Listen, a pattern because it will show up in other things. Maybe it's singing today, but tomorrow it could be speaking up for yourself. It could be going after that dream job that you know that you really, really want, but your confidence tells you that you're not qualified for it. And why is the confidence there? Maybe because when you were 5 years old, your mom told you, I don't know what you're going to do, child, with those big teeth. I ain't never seen nobody with teeth that big, right? It's the simple things that can be spoken over us in times of great development, the development in our lives that start to erode or shatter who we are. And I'm using buck teeth. Why? Because I got two big front teeth. I laugh as I say that because they are my biggest teeth. I don't think about them, but there are people who have front teeth bigger than mine, right? But we will take things about ourselves. I always say my hips. It's gotten so bad where the people that were around me, somebody might come in and be like, "Girl, you got some hips on you." Not that you asked, not that you needed them to say anything, but sometimes people just they will. They'll say the weirdest things. And now it starts to breed a certain amount of discomfort even with ourselves, where now we start to question ourselves. We start to question our abilities. We start to look at, well, God, if they said this, if they noticed this. And I've always gotten so much attention about my hips from the time I was a teenager. I would say, I wish I could fold into myself and disappear and just walk down the street and nobody has anything to say to me, right? because we will take an instant, and that is one that I can consciously say, okay, I know where this behavior comes from. But my goal is to allow you to give yourself permission if you stay with me and just allow yourself to say, what if? Just ask yourself that question. What if there were some things that I may not even be aware that I'm doing that's preventing me from living the life that I was created to live? And fear is so powerful. I had a friend, and I know you've heard it. We've all heard it. She would say, Ingra, fear is nothing but false evidence appearing real. And I know that fear did not come from God. And so when we allow ourselves to operate in fear, and it can be fear of so many things: fear of judgment, fear of being ridiculed, fear of embarrassment. And this is one that I continue to struggle and try to identify my fears. There was one point in time where I said, anytime fear comes up and I know it's fear because I felt it, I'm going to do it anyway. You are much more powerful than you know. But life happened, hurts happened, situations happened that were out of your control. But it ends today. Today, it starts with a decision. And we talked about people thinking, I have to do something big if I commit to change. But instead, change, it happens with the little things that you do every single day, the little decisions that you make. And before you know it, you look up and you'll say, wow, I did that. I accomplished that. I made that happen. I want nothing more for you than you to be everything you were meant to be, because you aren't cold. Yes, life happened, pains happened, hurts happened, and it all caused pressure for you to shine and be the diamond that you are. So I want you to stay with me because we're building and we're moving on to awareness. And we're going to dig deeper in how you develop and recognize the roots that have been planted in your mind. We're going to start pulling them out little by little, but we're going to go deep because you can't just yank it from the top because we don't want to leave anything in there. We need every single root. And so we're going to go slow so we can wiggle that mug out. Because believe it or not, it's not over. You're still becoming.